Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Hi, Roshni.
Tom, how are you?
I'm great. I'm digging into the pilot season data, and it's so interesting. Not that I watch
season
TV.
has been pretty bizarre this year. I think upfronts just happened. Not a lot of pilots were ordered. It seems like a lot of things were cut, and yet there's also articles coming out saying that even though there's been a ton of cancellations, they actually haven't cut as much as you think they've cut. So let's dig in.
Right. Yeah, no, I read that just this afternoon. I was reading, the Hollywood Reporter's been doing a lot of reporting on it, that the TV networks have made fewer shows, so the number of cancellations dropping is kind of proportional in some cases, but it's still drastically different. Like they used to historically, in the last decade or so before the pandemic, broadcasters made 105 scripted shows a year on average. The main broadcasters, the 4 or 5 networks, whatever it was. This season and last season were about 86, 87 respectively. So that's, 20% right there. So there's 20% fewer shows being made, scripted shows anyway. And one interesting fact is that ABC this year canceled the same number of scripted shows. Actually, no, 4 years ago, ABC canceled the same number of scripted shows that they actually showed this year. So they were canceling as many shows as they're actually making now. That's how different things have gotten.
So it's basically a wash, really, for them.
No, well, it's just it's just they have so fewer shows that it's kind of weird. It's kind of like if you're a long running show, you're like golden right now. Like they look at you like the golden goose. I mean, most of the shows that were renewed are like in double digit years. Like some are in their 20s, and Simpsons is like 34.
Oh, Simpsons has to be way older than that.
No, that's what it is.
It's
Season
really
34.
Only 34 years old? I mean,
a lot of years.
Only 34, but you know what I mean.
It's old enough to have a kid in high school. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Bart is not in high school.
That would be so funny. The Simpsons have a kid in high school. That's like the cousin show or whatever. But anyway, carry on. You were saying
Maggie could be in high school. Yeah, actually.
No, she's been a baby this whole time. My goodness, what's her secret?
That's a lot. Yeah, I hope she doesn't need baby formula. That's a whole nother story,
right?
Yeah. So if you're a procedural, that can renew their cast with fresh faces all the time, so you don't get too expensive, they just keep plugging you in. Because broadcast networks on their broadcast side are basically still programming for syndication, right? They want to program enough episodes, the 4-year package at least, so that they can then syndicate it to, broadcast networks and local stations. And does anyone still watch local stations? And, and internationally as well.
Yeah.
That side of their business is kind of hunkering down on existing shows. Although this season there were, quite a few cancellations, but fewer pilots were ordered. So they are sticking with the older shows, and then they're ordering fewer. They're down anywhere from 10 to 20% on the ordering side for new shows, which obviously affects us writers. I don't think the number of TV shows being made is down, because if you look at the streamers and all the other outlets now, there's hundreds and hundreds of shows being made all the time. So that's kind of a separate discussion. But if you want to get into broadcast, that's getting to be a smaller and smaller, audience, not audience, but pool of shows that you could actually get staffed on, or, or sell a script to, or get a pilot made, because they're just not as many if you're going to broadcast. But I mean, how many times have you talked to our friends who are writers who are always, whenever they're pitching you a show, it's like, I'm doing this for this streaming thing or that streaming thing or this cable network. Like everyone's kind of like targeting their stuff to specific audiences, because they know that trying to get into a network these days is really tricky.
Well, I think there's a couple reasons for why we're seeing what we're seeing. So first of all, filming has resumed. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the pandemic is, quote, "over," even though it's not really over, but the world is kind of treating it like such, so we're getting back to normalcy. However, a lot of shows that you see, well, actually pretty much every show you'd see on TV is a SAG project, so they're still following COVID protocol, which is expensive, and it's lengthy, and it takes a lot of time, so I'm sure they wanna just keep going with what they have existing versus, like, spending the money and the time and the effort on something new that could tank, and you've got that extra layer of COVID protocol, so there's that.
Right.
I think also as the world is reopening, you also have to think that people, I mean, everyone's going back to the bars and going to restaurants and, whatever outside. They're not gonna spend we've spent 2 years in front of the TV, you know?
Right.
So you might as
Mhm,
well
little
give
fatigue
them,
there.
yeah, instead of trying to hook them with something new, just give them same old, same old. You're not really losing anything by going with a sure bet. We've also, I mean, in the last couple weeks, we've seen a lot of stuff happening with streamers, like Netflix was freaking imploding, they're going through a lot of changes right now, and they're one of the biggest. So, that's gotta shake out and see what's happening. I think reality right now is probably still easier to shoot, because it's non-union and it's just easier to film than a
Yeah,
scripted show, so you've got that issue as well. So I think there's a lot of things that play into it.
right. The Netflix thing I don't think is such as big an issue as people make it out to because, if you look at the stats, Netflix is while they might be shrinking in the US, they're still growing all over the planet. I mean, they have over 200 million subscribers worldwide, which you can't even get to as a broadcast network, just in the US.
Mhm.
Broadcast networks, that's why they're into syndication, is because they get their shows out internationally through distributors, that do the international packaging and the localizations and stuff. So that I think Netflix, is going to see their growth internationally. Maybe they've kind of peaked in the U.S., but then they've got revenue plans for the whole advertising package. Doing their package that is not ad free, and then cracking down on the passwords. That's a lot of money that they have that flies away when they people share passwords.
Yeah.
I think Netflix is not part of the pilot season really, so it's not really an issue for this. But the networks are competing with that is the problem.
Yes.
And while the streamers and cable, they're generally programming for their own catalog. They don't syndicate really. Some of HBO syndicated like The Sopranos, and they did some home DVD stuff and Blu-ray for some of their shows like Stranger Things. But they're kind of building catalogs. So when you and this is what is great about for the networks is the networks have a huge catalog in the back as well. So when they launch their streamer, they have a catalog too. But all of that just when on a world level is think about it this way: if you never had a streaming before and you were living in a foreign country and you didn't have you had limited access to whatever American shows and stuff, and suddenly Netflix is available in your country, or HBO Max, or Peacock, now that it's not a broadcasting, it's a streaming thing, you suddenly have access to decades and decades worth of content. It's kind of overwhelming when you think about it. And then the studios and networks are constantly making more. So if you were in a country that is just getting Netflix now, you have a decade of content that you haven't even seen yet that's like dropped in your lap. So it's interesting. It's a different problem on the consumption side than it is on the production side.
Talk about fatigue, though. Oh my gosh, if you dropped, like, I haven't gone through the entire Netflix catalog, like, I'm not
Oh
who has
yeah,
time for that?
I mean, just take for one show for example, like Ozark. I watched the pilot episode of Ozark. Fantastic show. I
Mhm,
have not had time to sit down and continue to watch the 4 seasons of it that have just recently ended. So at some point, I have 4 seasons of a show I have not even started to watch. That I can say the same thing about Better Call Saul.
mhm.
These are like award-winning shows, and that's just 40 or 50 hours of television for each of them. Yet on top of that, there's hundreds of new things being produced all the time. So it is kind of an overload. The international market, that's where the streamer, that's where Netflix has kind of a head start, but the streamers can pick up and catch up really quickly because, and not the streamers, the broadcast networks, and they have a huge back catalog of their own to work with for that. It makes me wonder why at some point we should just say stop making new stuff. Not that I want them to, because that would be the end of our careers. Literally, if they stop, people talked about how, oh, there's nothing new to watch during the pandemic. It's like, I don't think people really watched everything. I think it'd be impossible.
But you bring up an interesting point. So going back a little bit here in this conversation. So, yes, there is a lot of content and back content that you can watch, but here is where the streaming model, first of all, the whole streaming model of binge watching
Mhm.
versus the weekly release, like on a broadcast
Mhm.
network, but also the quantity over quality mentality. Because what was the biggest thing that helped people find new shows was word of mouth, water cooler talk,
Mhm.
right? You talk about it with your friends, you talk about it with your coworkers. That's what got you to watch shows. And everyone would be like, "Hey, did you see Survivor on this channel? Did everybody watch, I don't know, whatever, Game of
Lost
Thrones or
or
Lost or whatever?"
yeah,
Game of Thrones is
Walking
probably
Dead,
not the
yeah.
best example because it's HBO, but you know what I'm saying. So, like, well, even that's
Mhm.
AMC. But you know what I'm saying as far as, like, the broadcast ones, you had a limited amount to choose from, and so chances were good 1 in 5 you would know what people were talking about. And you could catch up with
Mhm.
it and follow it enough that you could catch up with the water cooler talk the following week. So the problem is it's not even like the pandemic and we've all been away from each other, whatever. It's just there's so much, and we've talked about this before. There's so much content all over the place. You can't have water cooler talk because I might not have Amazon Prime and you might not have Apple TV. And there's good shows
Right.
on all of them, but I'm not buying 5 different services just to watch what, all my friends are watching. It's just not
Mhm.
going to happen.
Yeah, it used to be the age of 40 or 50 million people would watch Cheers to get, and everyone would talk about the episode the next day. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't know anyone I can talk to about some of the shows I watch because I watch Korean science fiction. It's like who's gonna see that or anime? I mean,
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
people who watch those things, but it's tricky. It's definitely it. It's harder to. It's also harder to make like pop culture references when I don't watch a lot of broadcast as much as I used to.
Mhm.
I'm actually on the cusp of probably getting Hulu again to catch up on a few shows that were on Hulu that I haven't seen in a while. But I've been watching Paramount Plus, which is includes a lot of CBS stuff,
Mhm.
and so there's stuff on there that I'm catching up on, and all the Star Trek shows. So yeah, there's certain cultural things in some of these areas that yeah you can connect with people on, but you are right. There are so many things out there to watch. It makes me wonder if this pilot season makes sense anymore. Because, the whole idea of pilot season was here's all our great shows that everyone's going to watch, right?
Mhm.
And they would, and the upfronts, which is what they just are just having right now, where they show that to the advertisers and they say, okay, how much are you going to give us to advertise on these shows? Well, I got to think the advertisers are going to be a little scratching their heads going, well, how can you guarantee, the audience that you used to when it's not even just streaming, but before that, DVRs were, viewing has been growing over the years.
Mhm.
So people were watching, with DVRs where they might be able to skip the commercials even. So I feel like that whole business model I don't want to say it's like the Titanic sinking, but, you know, I think in the last 5 years, I read that cord cutting has grown like of the 76% of American homes that had cable or satellite, now it's down to like 56%.
Mhm.
So, and now with things, and it's actually kind of ironically going backwards with Netflix saying they're going to launch an ad based service, maybe there's a little bit of clawing back going on there. And with the streaming services, it's easier to digitally count your viewers. So I kind of like making the devil's advocate argument of my own discussion right there.
I mean, I was gonna say too, though, um, we haven't had a pilot season, quote unquote, traditional pilot season in years because it used to
Hmm.
be, pilots would get picked up like winter, early January. and then they would film them, and then they would release them in the spring, and then, they would, in theory,
You
go
mean like
to.
announce them in the spring?
Yeah, and then in theory, they would go to, production. Well, they would already be in production, but then they would air, like, in the fall or whatever, or the
Right.
following winter, and we haven't had that in a long time because of streaming. Things are getting filmed all the time, so that was already happening, and then the pandemic happened, and it's like, we really don't. If it wasn't for those articles, I was like, "We have a pilot season?" I had no clue, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and similarly with the viewing habits, like we talked about Netflix and binge watching, most of the new streamers like Disney Plus um, and Paramount Plus, they are sticking to the week by week release schedule. Like
Mhm,
so they want you to come back, every week. So even though the series run is maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 at the most episodes, they're going to lock you in for at least 2 to 3 months, 4 months maybe, and then hopefully they'll have another show to keep you subscribing after that.
mhm,
So that's the year-round programming that the streamers are doing. Now Netflix was doing it by releasing new shows constantly. They were dropping all the episodes, but then they have new shows.
mhm.
But that becomes a little, right now you can see with their numbers, it's kind of hard to keep up with. And they canceled a bunch of shows. Actually, Netflix is actually canceling more shows
Yeah.
than they usually do.
The model is a bit unsustainable. I cannot speak. The binge model is a bit unsustainable, I think, just because, not even from a standpoint of, "Oh, we lost subscribers because they only bought it for, like, the one show and binged it in a week and they're done," but think of how much content. If you do a once a week model, in theory, maybe you need 20 shows, right, for the season, but if you're doing, like,
Hmm.
binge content, it's, like, double, triple that.
You need like 52, like one a week,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. So
Hmm.
it's unsustainable, I think, for quality also, quality purposes, and that you don't burn everybody out.
Yeah, yes, and if you have to grind like that show after show, yeah, it can be a bit of a grind, almost like a chore. Like I feel like my queue on Netflix is like, well, they used to have a queue. It's just kind of like my list now is what they call it, and it's not a list; it's kind of a row, and it just kind of scrolls endlessly left to right. So maybe that's supposed to take off some of the pressure that you have this really long list of things you haven't watched. Because I always felt like the long list on the website made me feel like I was like I'm never going to watch all this stuff, which I still feel, but it's less prevalent in my mind because it's shown differently on screen.
Mm,
So yeah, so the pilot season is happening, but I feel like it's I don't want to say an exercise in futility, but I feel like in a few more years it's gonna kind of like trickle away until it's just because of each network having their own streamer, it's gonna kind of be like it's gonna trickle away until it's kind of just a year round kind of thing where they're just always announcing new shows.
yeah, yeah, which to me is, I mean, not to be like, "Back in the old day," but, like, it was kind of fun to know that there was a bunch of new shows in the fall that you could watch, and it was kind of
Hmm.
nice to know that they had an end date, and, like, in the summertime, you could watch reruns or do whatever you wanted,
Right.
it was kind of nice
Hmm.
to have that routine, and that's gonna go away because, yeah.
Do you remember cartoon pilot season?
Was there a cartoon pilot season?
It's kind of, I don't want to call it. I mean, from a viewer standpoint, there was a point of the year, and I don't know what time how the seasons worked on that, at which the networks came out with their slate of cartoons for the next season, and they would have like a preview show that I always watched. It was usually a Saturday morning kind of thing, and they would show you clips from all the new cartoons that were going to be out. And it was like, oh my god, because I used to plan my Saturday mornings based on the cartoons and Sunday mornings,
Oh my
and it was literally like
gosh.
they were stacked up for 4 or 5 hours, from 8 in the morning till noon, basically.
I do not remember this.
And it was every network, and it was all at least the three major networks. You had ABC,
Wow.
NBC, CBS. Yeah.
I
Oh,
would have
that was
totally watched that too. I don't remember this.
yeah. It was cool.
Oh my
So
word.
they haven't done that in a long time. That's
I
been gone for a
do
long time.
I do remember in the fall, So I remembered it always seemed to me like they would debut the heavy hitting, like, we know that these shows are gonna go the distance in the fall, and then, like, they would have soft releases of shows that they weren't quite sure about in January.
Yeah, that's the mid-season, they call them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they're usually shorter seasons, like a half a season, and they often call them mid-season replacements because sometimes they're putting them in a slot where another show was canceled
Mhm.
because it didn't perform well.
Yeah.
Or it's just during a break, it
Yeah.
might be, like, during a break, and then when the break's over, they move it to, like, Friday nights or something.
Yeah, but I do remember the fall was always supposed to be like, these are the ones that we are really, really confident about. Those were the shows that they would put in there.
It was always a really big badge of honor if you started as a mid-season replacement or a mid-season, premiere, and then got picked up and continued. And that the biggest
Yeah.
one I remember was the X-Files.
Was that a mid-season replacement? Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
know
I think
that.
yeah, so, I think the first season was, like, 13 episodes. I'd have
Oh
to
my
double check that,
gosh.
but
I
yeah,
never I
so
never
s
watched it, like, I caught a couple episodes here and there, but I wasn't, like, a huge follower of it, so that's why I wouldn't know. What do you know what show it was replacing?
I don't know, it might just have been a mid-season show, not
Hmm,
necessarily replacing something,
m'kay.
so
Wow, that's crazy. So what do you think besides, we'll have a pilot well, I guess that would be no pilot season, but, like, what else do you think trend-wise will be happening?
I think what we're gonna see is, I don't know. It's such a mess. I think that, the streamers are gonna become are becoming the predominant, um, viewing method,
Mhm,
and it'll because it's gonna allow the broadcast networks to have a wider audience, and also to hopefully pick up, some of the younger audience that has kind of, up till now, skewed away from broadcast TV for streaming, entertainment.
mhm.
So that's a chance there. I don't know if it's going to change the content so much because I think broadcast is still going to want to keep the same, kind of standard of audience that they have. Although I have to be honest with you, I was watching Star Trek Picard on the Paramount Plus network. They drop f bombs on Star Trek. I kid you not,
Well, I
and
think you can
it
get away
really
with a lot more on streaming.
yeah, but still, it's Star Trek. They never even did that in the movies for Star Trek. But here we are. They're dropping, f bombs and other stuff in a streaming show that has traditionally, skewed, family
Family
oriented.
friendly.
Yeah,
They're like, "Captain's log. Beep."
yeah. Those bleeping Klingons. So that so you might see some differences in the kind of programming. It
Mhm.
it could be a liberating thing for the broadcast networks if those shows if the shows on the streaming platform are generally just for the streaming platform, or if they have to bleep them or edit them for
The
the
broadcast, yeah,
broadcast.
yeah.
We haven't seen how that's going to pan out yet because so far I haven't seen what's on Peacock and what have you. HBO was kind of the biggest one, but they're already a cable network, and then and having a streaming network, it doesn't really matter to them. Hulu was kind of the big place where the broadcast networks dumped their shows digitally,
Mhm.
but that's all changed since Disney bought Fox and ABC. I don't know if NBC is going to get out of Hulu now or not, but we'll have to see what happens with that. I don't know. It's a crazy wild world out there. I actually there's a I'm gonna try to contact this writer I follow on TikTok who was talking about how we've talked about before how writers have a difficult time booking these streaming shows for 10 episodes or whatever it is, and then going to try to find another job that doesn't conflict with it. Because I think it's gonna get really hard. The one thing about pilot season that was so great was it gave you a standard schedule, and you knew when you got a network show you're going to work for 22 or 26 episodes.
I was I was gonna say, I feel like that would be the biggest change with how things are going, is the staffing uncertainty as far as the timing. Kinda makes me wonder if the spec script, which has sort of fallen out of vogue in the last couple years, might rise again, because if you can freelance for a bunch of different shows, then you have more schedule flexibility, correct?
Wow. Yeah, I
So
mean, if you're an established TV writer, but you're not on one show, maybe you could pull that off. Yeah.
yeah, and I think also it's gonna force people. So, we've had this discussion before, years ago about the difference in, American TV versus, like, maybe British TV, where British TV, they write for the whole season, American TV, they would write it maybe they'd write a few episodes, but then it was, like, week by week by week because they never really knew what was happening, but because of streaming, now it's a more contained thing, it's like writing a film, right? You know the beginning, middle, and
Hmm.
end. So, writers are definitely gonna have to be more in tune with that. They can't just that's the only issue with the spec
Hmm.
script, right? You need to know where you're going and be able to slot it in the whole thing, but it's gonna be it's gonna be interesting. I think it's definitely gonna screw with scheduling.
Yeah. The question there is the whole, serialized versus procedural. It's mostly serialized on cable networks. There's not a whole lot of procedurals on cable. So with the blending of broadcast and streaming, are we going to see, besides just reruns, are we going to see more procedural type shows on streamers?
You know that
Original procedurals.
you bring that up and I'm like, "You're right." Like, all of those, like, CSI and
Hmm.
Law& and Order, yeah, those are all broadcast.
Even uh, the Star Trek Picard shows are very serialized. They're one
Yeah,
story for 10 episodes.
yeah.
Although the newest one, Strange New Worlds, this new prequel Star Trek show, is kind of, planet of the week kind of thing. So it is kind of
Mhm.
procedural. It's a little different.
Hmm.
I mean, there's some character arcs that are longer, but it is kind of one of the more week by week shows. That's you could tune into one episode and not be lost.
But, I mean, it's such an interesting point because streaming doesn't lend itself to like, why would you wanna binge a procedural that has really no story arc? I mean, I'm not saying that,
Right.
like, CSI and all that don't have a story arc, but it's very light compared to some sitcom or something where the
Hmm.
characters are gonna go, because that's not the point of a procedural, you know?
Right. And the point of syndication and procedurals in general is you can turn it on any day of the week and watch an episode, and you don't have to worry about what season it
Yeah.
is or what episode it
You can just
is. You
slot
know who the
yourself
characters
in.
are. You know this. Yeah, you just sort of
Yeah.
see what's the mystery of the week kind of thing.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that, but now that you bring it up,
Yeah.
that's a really good point. Huh.
And if the broadcast networks do create procedurals for streamers, is that a good thing or not? Can a procedural work there? Yes, you could release it week by week, but once it's up there, it's up there. Then you've got a whole series of every episode is the same formula. People could still go through it, but it's like with a serialized show, you're drawn through it. It's kind of like, okay, I have to
Mhm.
watch the next episode if I want to know what happens. So that's why you binge it, and that's why you watch the whole season, because you want to know what the story is, how it
Yeah.
ends. But with the procedural, you can pick it up and put it down any time of the day, and I don't know if that would work as well on streaming.
I mean, I guess the only thing, and it's obviously not the same, but that fits that format of procedural would be reality shows. Like a cooking competition or something where, like, there's
Hmm.
really no through line, you just watch it because it's fun. But even then, those have, like, they're done in 6,
Hmm.
10, 12 episodes. Yeah, I mean, like, now that I think about it, I wouldn't want to watch I wouldn't wanna pay for a streaming service just to watch a show that never ends unless there's something else compelling. Like, I don't need to
Hmm.
tune in every week to know who died and who done it. That doesn't matter to me, and if you're not gonna develop the
Hmm.
characters very thoroughly, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, that's a really good point. Huh.
That gives me a good point to end on,
Sure.
and that's, at least with streaming networks, when you're doing your whole season, you're not going to get canceled in the middle of the season.
That's true, because you gotta finish the
Yeah,
story. Yeah.
you got to finish the season. So that's a plus side, I think, in the streaming world. The one other thing I wanted to ask you, and let me know what you think about
Oh,
this,
yeah,
is
sure.
do you think writers are going to become kind of like they were back in the golden days of silver screen, whatever, where the writers were hired by the studios and they just went from, they went from movie to movie to movie. Then do you think they're going to be like, okay, we've got this, staff of writers on one show. Well, why don't we just use them on other shows instead of staffing each show separately?
You
You see
mean
what I'm saying?
like the studio system where they had, like, their own stable of writers and actors and directors? Yeah.
Exactly.
I
It would be easier for everybody if they did, but then you might not be the right writer for all the shows.
okay, here's my thought on that. It would be lovely. I mean, for the people who get, you know, hired to be in that stable. I think the reason, though, that they won't do it anymore, like the golden age of Hollywood, and you're already seeing it in the music industry has been like this for years. In fact, the music industry probably did it even before Hollywood did. People don't wanna take a risk on something unknown. And the whole point of having a stable of actors, directors, and writers like it was in the golden age of Hollywood, or like it was, in the music industry back in the, like, '70s, '80s, '90s, is artist development. But that's a long time to break somebody. You know, you could get the next Spielberg or you could get a total dud. You don't know. And that's a
Yeah.
lot of time and money that you're spending to see if they will be the next Spielberg, right?
Well,
Can your
yeah.
studio afford
Hmm.
that? So, I think in a way it would make sense, but they would only do it if you had a proven track record. They're not gonna develop new talent because it's too costly. And right now, especially with the pandemic, no one's gonna wanna spend that kind of money. That would be my thought on it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. What do you think out there? Yeah, what do you guys think about pilot season? Anything particularly looking pretty exciting, or is it scary, or is it exciting? Let us know. Do follow us on social at WG Therapy on Twitter and Instagram, and writersgrouptherapy.com. And good luck sorting out your viewing schedule in the next year or so.